This episode is sponsored by Free Market Kids. Join the league of families who are transforming family time into unforgettable Bitcoin learning experiences. With our HODL Up Bitcoin mining board game, you're not just playing, you're building bridges, creating memories, and unlocking the brilliance of the future one block at a time.
Hey, everybody, real quick before we start the podcast today, I just wanted to say thank you. Tali and I would like to say thank you for listening. And we have a code for those that would like to get a free copy of the ebook that goes with the game HODL Up. The code is BHS, so Bitcoin Homeschooler, abbreviated BHS, or if you're in the military, Bravo Hotel Sierra. Go to our website at Free Market Kids, use BHS with the ebook version of 21 Bitcoin lessons using games, and we'll send it right over to you. We do ask if in return, it would be wonderful if you would sign up for our email newsletter. You don't have to, but we'd appreciate it. And enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to Bitcoin Homeschoolers. Today's episode will just be me. Scott is away at a game conference, mingling with other game designers, manufacturers. So it's just going to be me today, and I've got a very exciting announcement to make, which is that my daughter and I have partnered together and written the first book in a series of children's books. So I'm going to go a little bit in depth into why I decided to write this series and what I'm hoping to accomplish. The idea for writing this early reader series actually started a couple of years ago. I had a vague notion that I wanted to convey some lessons that I learned through 20 years of homeschooling the kids and what I observed not only with my own kids, but what other families experience in the homeschooling community. It took about 2 years for the ideas to solidify. I remember reaching out to my niece 2 years ago and asking if she was free to draw some pictures for me because she's a very wonderful illustrator. And she said, "What is it that you want to tell?" And I was not able to verbalize what I wanted to say. It took about 2 years of the idea percolating in my mind before it finally just downloaded all at once. I wrote the first book and then quickly wrote 4 books after that. I reached out to my daughter, Brianna, who is available this summer, and she agreed to draw the pictures for me. And very quickly, within a short time, we were able to finish the first book, Flowers for Mom. The idea that I'm trying to convey with the series that I'm calling the Super K Adventures is I really want to get back to the roots of the good old fashioned values that we used to teach our kids. I feel like today with a lot of the social media, like the young influencers and the work agenda, etc., we have veered away from values that actually bring a lot of self-confidence to children. When we tell kids today that they can be whatever they want and give them no boundary, we imagine that it would give them more freedom and more sense of self-worth and self-validity. But actually what I have seen, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a philosopher or anything, but I'm seeing I'm telling you what I've seen over the last 20 years is the kids that have a firm boundary set by parents with good intentions, they tend to be more secure in themselves because they know that there are people looking out for them and they know where the line is. When you give no lines and in the name of complete free self-expression for the kids, they end up what I have observed is that they end up being extremely insecure. They don't know right from wrong necessarily. And they can feel like they may not be able to verbalize it, but they can feel something amiss. They can feel people's reaction to them that are unspoken, but still there. For example, some families we used to interact with adopted the idea that parents shouldn't ever say no to their children. That's a way of limiting their children's freedom of expression. That sounds really great on paper and maybe in the books that some popular psychology authors would talk about, but in reality, what you observe is that these kids can't get along with anybody because nobody has taught them how exactly to interact successfully in social situations. They are very difficult for other parents to handle. So when we co-teach, they are the kids that we don't want in our class because we cannot control them at all. And other kids don't want to play with those kids either because they don't know how to compromise. When you have more than one person trying to play, they have to compromise on some level. And these kids are never said no to. They don't know how to compromise. And there's actually, in the Bitcoin space, we talk a lot about FUD around money and FUD around energy and FUD around food, health. I think there's actually also a lot of FUD around parenting. When I had the idea to write the Super K Adventures, one of the main goals that I had was to just come back around to the good old fashioned, I call it good old fashioned values, but really it's just really common sense values. That was my original intent. But as I was preparing for this podcast and actually planning to talk about values like integrity and honesty and self-responsibility, etc., it struck me through a recent conversation that there was actually something even deeper that we're missing. So very recently, a friend of mine told me that her daughter attempted suicide, which was a very huge shock because the family is very loving. The family is very close. They belong to a church community that is also very supportive. So it was very shocking. It was very shocking that someone from a social environment like that would think that life is not worth living. Because I always, in the past, would assume that if somebody would try something or even contemplate an idea like suicide, they would either be mentally unstable or they came from a very harsh environment that stole their hope for life. But that's not the case from the personal stories that I have heard. For example, a friend a few years ago actually did succeed in taking his own life. Again, a loving family, part of a very supportive church community. And I went to the funeral and I stood there and I just was so confused. I just couldn't wrap my head around why this child would think that his life was not worth living. A few years back, I don't know if you guys remember this or watched this, but there was a show on Netflix called 13 Reasons Why. And it ran for 3 seasons. And studies show that during those 3 years, American teen suicide rate increased by 25%. I never watched it, but my understanding is that they almost glorify doing that, like exiting life and leaving a mark that way. I live in Kentucky, and the state of Kentucky started an initiative to combat what 13 Reasons Why was doing with teens. And so they started this project. It's a teen suicide prevention series. And my daughter was cast in the show. And because she was a minor, I went to the shoot every single day with her. And I was able to converse with people who have been brought in as teen mental health consultants. And I was able to interact with the crew and a lot of the community, the school teachers, the local school teachers. It was a huge endeavor. A lot of people came together to make this project happen. But prior to that, I didn't really have very much exposure personally to people who experienced loved ones trying or succeeding at suicide. And I was shocked to hear almost everybody on set saying that they knew someone who did that. So anyway, so tying it all back to the Super K adventure. So my original intent when I wrote the Super K adventures was for fun and have a money literacy young reader series. But I by accident stumbled on this idea that maybe what we need to do as parents, what we can add on top of emphasizing money literacy is to start shifting our kids' eyes from external rewards to intrinsic sense of value. So originally, I wanted a young reader level book that is similar to William Bennett's Big Book of Virtues that came out 25 years ago. And it was a collection of stories that were listed by the virtue they highlighted in his book. That was a very thick volume. And then he created a book specifically for kids. So I wanted to follow in those footsteps and highlight virtues like honesty, integrity, and bravery, because I feel that a lot of entertainment today glorify getting away with things. It's almost like if you do right things, you're a goody two shoe and you're boring and you're a nerd. But if you break the rules, if you get away with doing wrong things, you're almost heroic, which is to me such a strange backward thinking of what is good and bad. So anyway, so that was my original intent. But because of what I heard from my friend about what her daughter tried to do last week, it brought my attention back to the confusion that I felt when I was standing in the middle of my friend's funeral, wondering what happened to our young people that they would think life is not worth living, or that they are so worthless that nobody's going to miss them if they took themselves out of this life. Please bear with me. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but there is a connection with everything that I'm saying right now. I promise. Okay, so I'm going to go into Super K Adventures, but I really want to emphasize the hero journal that goes with it. So the Super K Adventures, the first book is Flowers for Mom. And as I mentioned before, I originally wrote it so that we can start to gently introduce money literacy concepts, and then also to highlight traditional virtues, taking responsibility for your actions, being honest, having integrity, being brave, facing your mistakes and making amends, that type of thing. So in the book, Flowers for Mom, our little guy, 7-year-old Kay, he accidentally breaks his mom's vase of flowers that his dad gave his mom. And he is in a dilemma. He wants to lie about it. He wants to blame his dog, but eventually he does tell the truth. And not only did he tell the truth, but he also offered to replace the flowers. He did not ask his parents for money. He did not go to his grandparents for money, but he decided to take responsibility and do what he could as a 7-year-old boy. So he transforms into his alter ego, Super K. And of course, Super K can do super things. He goes to his mom, dad, granddad, grandma, and he offers to help them with things, help them with chores around the house so that he can earn money. So over time, he's able to earn enough money to replace, in his mind, there was an amount. He asked his dad, how much do I need to earn so that I can buy mom the flowers to replace them for her? And he said $10. Well, Kay works very hard over a period of time, and he's able to save up $10. He's very excited. He's about to go and do what he promised his mom would do. And bam, price increased, and the flowers are no longer $10. So in that way, yes, I'm sliding in a little bit of the inflation concept. I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, so I'm not going to go all the way to the end of the book, but that's sort of the setup of the story. And every book following Flowers for Mom will have some kind of adventure for this 7-year-old boy and his 3 siblings. And yes, they are based on my memories of my 4 kids when they were very little. And so the stories are fun, and the stories are meant to sort of a bridge to express various real life happenings kids should be aware of and maybe not being told explicitly is happening, like inflation and such. So the stories are fun, and the fonts, I decided purposefully to make them very big because when kids are just learning how to read, they really need the words to be pretty large. If we give them a fine print, like the regular 12-point print, it's actually very difficult for kids to focus their eyes that way. You can read up on the vision changes of kids as they mature. But for younger kids, words really need to be quite large, like larger than what we would be used to reading. So I set the font at 28 point on purpose for the kids, but also for the grandparents so that they can read the books to the kids and not have to look for their reading glasses. So that's one thing. And the other thing is I wanted the words, the sentences to be quite short because I do want these books to dual purpose as early reading books for kids. It would serve as a book that the parents will read to them first, and then they will read to themselves. So the sentences are short intentionally. The other thing is I also wanted the pictures to be very relatable. I didn't want the lines to look very clean, and I didn't want the colors to be uniform because if you look at a book called like the Blue's Clues, I think most people know Blue's Clues style. It's digital art and the lines are very crisp and the coloring is very perfect and it's clearly not a human made kind of art. It's very clearly like just digitally made. And when my kids were little, I noticed that they almost never reached for those books. They always reached for books that look like a human hand drew the pictures, even though to the adult eyes, like those pictures are not even that great. The pictures are not perfect. The proportions are maybe not true to life. But I noticed my kids at least always reached for the pictures that are closer to their own level. So like the old Clifford the Big Red Dog, the older Curious George type of books, the hand drawn, the hand colored in kind of style. And I think one of the reasons might be because they can see themselves able to draw something like that. Whereas if it's something like Blue's Clues, they know that it is just not, it's so far away from what they're doing with their hands, pen to paper kind of thing that I don't know why. They weren't drawn to it. So when I talked to my daughter when we were brainstorming about how we wanted the pictures to look, I wanted it to be raw and a little bit rough around the edges and just very much at the level that a 5-year-old can relate to and go, oh, if I tried a few times, I can maybe draw a picture like that. So I was recently at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, and I was able to observe kids reading Flowers for Mom. And I remember I walked by this little girl and she was reading it with her mom, and she turned and said, who drew these pictures? And I pointed to my daughter. At the time, she was across the way and talking to someone. And I said, well, she did. And the little girl said, how did she get so good? And I said, with lots of practice. But what I loved about that statement was like, she knew it was, let's see, how do I say this? She knew that it was something that a person can draw with some practice. Does that make sense? That it is not like hop on the computer and drag your mouse around. It's like she asked the question, how did she get so good? Meaning she understood that there was a progress that needed to be made, but that it was possible. So I loved that question. And she read the book with her mom. And when she was done, she walked up to my daughter and said, excuse me. And she said, I love your pictures. And I just, oh my gosh, it made me feel so good because I knew that we chose the right art form for these young reader books when she said that. So I was very glad. So big font, short sentences for young readers, and pictures that are relatable. And now I'm going to get into the Hero Journal, which kind of ties back into what I was saying before about our young people's mental health. Okay, so the Hero Journal. The Hero Journal, each day has 4 entries. The first entry is just recording the day. For the reason that this Hero Journal is meant for young kids, I printed out the weeks of the day. So all they have to do is circle it. So really, they're just recognizing the words. I didn't want them to have to write it out because at that age, early reader age, their dexterity in their hands are not great yet. The purpose is just for them to practice names of the weekdays and then practice the names of the month and write their numbers in. So you circle the day of the week, you read through the months, and under the month, the appropriate month, so right now it's July, they would write under the month the day. So for example, today is July 31st, so you would write 3-1, and underneath that will be 2024. So very simple, the first page. The second page is for them to draw a picture of something heroic that they did themselves. So it is one thing for them to read the Super K Adventures and read about the 17-year-old boy being responsible, being brave, taking responsibility, etc. But it's another thing to see themselves that way. Our hero culture today is all about the hero being somebody in a costume. So whether it's Superman or Batman or whatever Marvel or DC or any other superhero story out there, the hero is somebody else. And they solve the problem for everybody else. But I wanted the kids to start to see themselves as super. So the second page in the hero journal is very important. It is a way for them to form the habit of seeing their own good deeds. Life is fast and we are always running in and out. And especially if the kids are young, they might be doing sports, they might be going on field trips, depending on what you're doing with the kids, if they're going to school, if you're homeschooling. But life is fast paced. And there are a lot of things that we don't see because we're so quick to move on to the next thing. The purpose of this page is for the parent and the child to sit down together and reflect. If you're into meditation at all, you would know that reflection is very important. Are we teaching that to our kids? And when they reflect, what do they remember? If you reflect and you think of only the things that you did not like, how was your day? Well, Johnny broke my pencil. Okay, that's like an emotionally intense moment. So probably that's why it comes to mind first. How was your day? I fell down on the playground. Also emotionally charged experience. But the heroic things, like the good deeds, they may or may not have a very strong emotion charge. And so they, without a deliberate intention to bring it back into your mind, you pass them by, you don't even realize it. So for example, when you're talking to a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, what's something that's heroic that they can write down on their hero page? Well, if they're playing on the playground and they fell, but they got back up, that's heroic. Heroes, they get knocked down, they get back up. So you can draw a picture of just the boy at a playground. If his friend or his sibling fell down and he stopped to say, "Are you okay?" or he stopped to help the other child up, that's heroic to the person he helped. So you can draw a picture of that. If, let's say, mom had a headache and the child fetches Tylenol for her and brings her a glass of water, well, that is actually a wonderful act of good deed for the mom, right? If a sibling had a bad day and the child gives his sibling a hug, that's heroic because that made a difference to somebody else's life experience. So parent and child can reflect on the day and highlight these passing moments and recognize that they're actually really important. So the second page is for drawing a picture. The third page is to describe the experience in words. So, for example, in the example that the boy helped his sibling up after the sibling fell, you can say something like, "I helped brother up." That's 4 words. So a 5-year-old can write that, 6-year-old can write that. Now, if your child is not yet old enough to be able to write these words or even know how to spell, what I used to do was I would write out the words, but in dotted lines. And then I would just tell my kids, I would just tell them to trace my letters. So that serves 2 functions. One is They're practicing their dexterity, the muscle control in their fingers. And the second is they are actually seeing, like forming the words. And they may not consciously know that they are learning the spelling of the word or the identification of the word, but it's happening. The input is happening in the back of their mind. So depending on the child's age, please do not make this into a quiz kind of thing. And if they spell a word wrong, no biggie. Just write it correctly in a dotted line, have them trace. If you have heard our podcast from before, our previous episodes, I mentioned the book called Learning with Love, and it's by Suzuki, the guy who started the Suzuki violin method. He emphatically mentioned in that book how important it is to celebrate without correction. And yes, there is a place for correction, but in this case, in the beginning of learning, it's important to celebrate and to just show them the right way without correction. In the book called How to Teach Your Child to Read, that whole series, How to Teach Your Baby How to Read, How to Teach Your Baby Math, in that series by Glenn Doman, same thing. He says, if you hold up two words and say, point to mom, and the child points to dad, you say, oh, that's very good. And then you hold out the board that says mom. So you're correcting without the tone of correction. So if you're writing on the third page of the hero journal and your child spells dad with a D that goes backwards, you don't necessarily have to say the D is backwards, let's write it correctly. You can just say, hey, let's trace dad again, and you write it correctly. They'll get the point. But you don't want that tone of correction in there, because what we're trying to focus on is their good deeds. Correction and all of those things, let's get them a little bit, like we can talk about that on another occasion, but the emotional experience for the child when they're writing the hero journal should be celebratory in every way possible. Okay, so you have the first page, that's date. The second page, you draw a picture. The third page, you have them trace your words, or they can write their own words. And the fourth one is what I think is the most important, actually. And it says, what superpower did you use today? Now, in the example I gave in the hero journal, it's my smile, the child's smile. So you can draw a picture, write the word. Either one is fine. I think kids at that age probably would prefer to draw a picture. But again, if you want them to write words, write the words out in dotted lines and have them trace the words. Now, the superpower can be anything. This is a place to be really creative. So can the superpower be a soft touch? Yes, it can, because it's very comforting. Can the superpower be a hug, a really good hug? Yes, it can. Can the superpower be listening? Yes. Can the superpower be thoughtfulness? Yes. Can a superpower be staying quiet when somebody's talking? Yes. All of these things can be good. So again, the point of the journal entry is to celebrate the good deeds and to spotlight moments that might be passing until you reflect on it and you realize that was heroic to the person who was on the receiving end of it. Does that make sense? So so think long term here. Right now, your child's 5, let's say, and you start this journal every day. They're forming a habit of reflecting on their good deeds. You're not saying, hey, good job, I'm going to give you a piece of candy, or you can have ice cream. You're not saying, here's a sticker. If every day you do a good deed, you get a sticker. You're not saying, if you're going to do a good deed, then you can have the iPad. There's no external reward. There's just internal satisfaction. Every single person feels good when they're able to help another human being. That's just true. Unless you have some kind of mental disability or something, you feel good when you make a difference, a positive difference in somebody else's life. It's human nature. And so if we help our kids form that habit, they start to look at the world through the eyes of a powerful person, through the eyes of a capable person, through the eyes of somebody who matters. Okay, so getting back to this epidemic of teen depression, people talk about it being mental health issue. I wonder about that. Again, I am not a psychologist. I am not a philosopher. This is just what I see with my own two eyes. If we take the reward for a person and draw it completely outside of themselves, what do they have left with? So think about the way that our kids are brought up today in society, in schools, starting from even preschool. Everything is about positive reinforcement. And what is positive reinforcement? External reward. So just even in my own kids' experience, two of them did go to preschool. And it's about walking on the line that's taped down in the hallway. And then the teacher saying, good job. It's you doing something well, and then the teacher puts a sticker on the board for everybody to see. In every interaction like that, they're being told over and over again, without words, that their value is based on other people's recognition. So if they were to take themselves out, does it make sense that they would think that nobody will miss them? I don't know. Again, I'm treading on waters that are very sensitive, and I'm definitely not making light of what is happening and people struggling with mental health issues, but I'm asking questions as a parent. If you disagree with me, just forget everything I said. But if you think there might be something to it, start looking for data in the human interaction that you observe every single day and see what conclusion you come up with. Okay, let's tie it into homeschooling, since this is a homeschooling podcast. When you're the teacher, counselor, nurse, school principal, cook, driver, and when you have all those titles and you're responsible for all of them, it's really easy for us to live by the checklist. And as I mentioned before, life moves really fast. To not pay as much attention to these non-academic subjects, I have found that we are so, at least for myself, we are focused on making sure our kids can read and write and do math. The 3 R's, reading, arithmetic, writing, that everything else happens rather unintentionally. I just know that if I had to go back and do it all over again, one of the things that I would do differently is to realize that the 3 R's are the easiest subjects they can learn later in life. But the way that they see, the lens that they see through at life is much harder to adjust when they get older. I would encourage you, whether it's with Super K Adventures in the Hero Journal or something else, that you celebrate more often than not what your kids do right rather than to correct what they do wrong. I didn't understand when my kids were young how important that is, but I do now, looking back. So this is my encouragement to all the young homeschooling families out there. If you want to check out Super K, both the book and the journal are available on Amazon as well as on Free Market Kids. I did redesign the cover. So the original cover for the Hero Journal is on sale on Free Market Kids. If you go to Amazon, you should see the updated cover. It's blue. The one before was a lime green, but the inside is exactly the same. And if you want to just print out your own Hero Journal, you can go to super-k.com. It will be in the show notes, and you can print out the pages yourself. You don't have to buy a Hero Journal. I just made that available because it's a keepsake. When I go through my memory boxes with the kids' work, it just always warms my heart to go back and read their writings. Even if their writings were almost illegible in the beginning, I still treasure those writings, those drawings and writings so much. And so the keepsake book is bound and nice and all that. But if you don't want to invest in that, then just go to superk.com and you can print out the pages yourself. I would rather you help your kids form the habit of seeing their good deeds than to sell your book. Okay. So before I wrap up, I want to give you one last example to think about. In the book called Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill not only talks about how to have the right mindset for making money. But he shares an incredible personal experience with his son who was born without ears, talking about the importance of setting a powerful paradigm for your child to see the world through. So his baby was born without ears, and he was told by his doctor that the baby will be a handicap his whole entire life and basically will live a lesser quality life. And Napoleon Hill decided that was not the fate of his child. He was not accepting that fact. So he spoke to the baby for hours every day to tell him over and over again from the time he was newborn, but even as the child was growing up, that the lack of physical years was not going to be a handicap, but that it was a gift because he would receive more kindness from everyone he encountered because of the lack of physical years. And so he set that expectation for his baby. He shared that his son grew up expecting it and received it. So it just goes to show how important it is for us to direct our kids' attention to look at the world through a paradigm that is self-empowering. Because he very easily could have just decided to agree with the doctor and say, yeah, my son is handicapped. And yes, people are going to look at him funny because he has no ears. And he's probably going to have a difficult life because he can't hear. And this is early 1900s. And there weren't a lot of assistance for handicapped kids, but he decided that that was not the way he wanted his son to see the world. So I offer that example as another thing to think about as a parent when you're raising your kids, showing them that they are capable of making a difference in the lives of other people, especially the people who are closest to them, their family members, their siblings, their parents, their grandparents, their neighbors. It is so powerful. It is so powerful. So anyway, I wanted to offer up that example for you to consider before we wrap up. That's it for me. Thank you so much for listening today. Sorry, Scott wasn't a part of it. In the next episode, I'm going to interview my kids and have them talk a little bit about their favorite books when they were young readers themselves, what they looked for when they were picking books, just to give you a little bit more information about early reading from the point of view of the child. My kids are grown, but they'll remember things that are different than I do for sure. So that's the next episode, and I will see you then. Thank you so much. Bye.